which is the colonial legacies. And of course, a lot of people say, well, come on, colonialism is over. It's been, several decades since independence, but we have the unfinished business of decolonizing economic structures. So I focus on the economic structures that actually produce the results that we're looking at. So when it comes to the colonial role that was imposed on the African continent, it can be summarized in three basic points. Number one, we're supposed to be the place for cheap raw materials for the industrialized world. We still play that role today. Number two, we were supposed to be the place that consumes technology and industrial output from the global north. We still play that role today. And number three, and most importantly, we're supposed to be the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the industrialized world is outsourced to us under the label of development, cooperation, job creation, technical assistance, all of that. But effectively what it does is that it permanently locks us at the bottom of the global value chain. That was the role we played during colonial times. And unfortunately, that is the role we continue to play today. So colonialism, of course, was not a system for development. It was not designed to achieve sustainable development goals or a just transition or justice or anything. Colonialism was a system of extraction, of abuse. We should not be surprised that the same colonial structures, economic colonial structures that persist today are producing these bad results of malnutrition, of poverty, of socioeconomic exclusion. So that's why in the context of the just transition and the context of decarbonization, we always say we cannot decarbonize a system that hasn't been structurally and economically decolonized yet. And when it comes to kind of the visible manifestation of these problems, the issue of external debt, that is debt denominated in foreign currencies, in dollars and euros. It is a serious problem because it takes a huge amount of fiscal policy space that doesn't allow our governments to invest in the building blocks of development and prosperity, such as basic health and education and infrastructure, because we have to prioritize paying the external debt. But external debt is actually a symptom of deeper structural issues that have colonial roots. Number one, food deficits. Number two, energy deficits. And number three, manufacturing deficits. And I can explain each very briefly so we can understand why these are fundamental. When I say food deficits, according to UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, Africa today imports 85% of its food. 85%. When less than 100 years ago, during colonial times, we used to be the breadbasket for colonial powers. And what happened is that there's a redesign of the system as soon as we gained independence. In 1955, for example, in Europe, at the Treaty of Rome meeting, the Europeans said we have a food security problem for Europe because they were so dependent on Africa. And that introduced a common agricultural policy, which is in place to this day. So what is CAP? It's heavy agricultural subsidies to produce the core crops in Europe, such as corn and wheat and soybean and the core food security items. And of course, it wasn't just Europe that did that. It was the United States, Canada, Australia, the former Soviet Union, which is why Russia and the Ukraine today dominate the grain industry. And what it did is that it forced African farmers out of business because they couldn't compete with the subsidized wheat and corn coming from the global north. So we had to redesign our agriculture to specialize in cash crops for exports. Coffee, tea, tobacco, bananas, all the complementary items. So today we live in a world where we consume what we don't produce and we produce what we don't consume. And that's why we have real food insecurity on the African continent and the rest of the global south, obviously. So that's the food deficiency. Number two, energy deficiency. When I say energy deficits in Africa, I include our biggest oil exporter on the continent. Nigeria today imports 100% of its gasoline, not by accident, by design. Angola, our second largest oil exporter, imports 80% of its fuel from international markets. So we're constantly denied the technology for production, the technology for drilling, the technology for refining. So we export crude oil, we import refined petrochemicals. You export the cheap stuff, you import the more expensive stuff. So you're always in a deficit situation. And finally, the manufacturing deficits, the fact that the only type of manufacturing base that we were allowed to have is the kind where we have to import the machines, we have to import the fuel to power the factories, we have to import the intermediate components to be assembled with low-cost labor, and we even import the packaging. So we end up with the value-added content of what we export is low value added, what we import is high value added. So you can double, triple, quadruple your exports. You're always locked at the bottom of the value chain. And here's how it's manifests then. You have these structural deficits, the most fundamental areas. As you know, no country can function without food, without fuel, without manufacturing. So we have structural trade deficits. And what structural trade deficits do is that they weaken our currencies relative to the dollar, relative to the euro. And with the weaker currency, anything I need to import the next morning, whether it's food or fuel or medicine, you import it at a higher price. So we literally import inflation in the most sensitive areas of the economy, therefore hurting the most vulnerable people in society. And that immediately forces our governments into a defensive position to protect the most vulnerable. So what do? We subsidize food, we subsidize fuel, which makes sense to protect the most vulnerable, but you can't do that for 8 decades. And we ask our central banks to stabilize the exchange rate, to fight inflation. And the way they do it is by using a band-aid solution, which is borrowing more dollars. And that gets the external debt into a vicious cycle that is unsustainable, which means now the government is completely obsessed with prioritizing economic activity that will allow us to earn dollars as quickly as possible so that we service the debt. And we deprioritize economic activity that is actually transformational, that is actually the foundation of development and prosperity. And that is the essence of why we neglect so many of the priorities. And that's why a lot of the fiscal policy space that our governments have is dedicated to servicing the debt, which is by design the colonial architecture that was imposed on us. So that's why we say we can't really achieve the sustainable development goals or a just transition or any of the goals that we want to achieve under a system, an economic system that's still structurally colonized when we have economies that are technically steered from abroad.
Are we really witnessing the uprise of Africa, or particularly North and West Africa? Just after Namibia did the great thing they have done yesterday, which we talked about, Burkina Faso has just retaken their gold mines from a British company that is said to be the largest miner in Africa. And guess what they did after retaking the mines? They immediately nationalized them. This is what Gaddafi did in Libya. As soon as he took power, he nationalized the nation's oil wealth, and Libya became heaven on earth. All the money that was stolen by the West from the country through their corporations stopped, and Libyans began owning their own wealth. This is exactly what Burkina Faso has now done. Little by little, they take back all their natural resources out of the hands of the colonizing corporations and nationalize them to enrich their people. That's how a third world country in their own classifications becomes a first world. That's how you break loose from these chains of new colonial strangleholds, not playing to the gallery. When you tell other African nations that this where their problems are coming from, they will foolishly and flamboyantly, ignorantly dismiss it and say, oh, forget it, we are the problem, we have the problem inside. Yes, collaborators from inside are the problem. But also you need to know and educate yourself about who are the real masters that are killing you. It is the Western corporation, the pact for the continuation of colonization, which they make all these African leaders or presidents sign. It implies their corporations will have the right for discovery, refusal for any natural resources discovered in your country. These things are documented, just read them up. That's why they are in charge of mining and drilling and tapping all natural resources in your countries. And the monies go back to them, to Europe. They only leave you with crumbs, and yet you have refused to open your eyes and wake up. Look at this small Burkina Faso, talking like a giant, whilst the so-called ceremonial giant of Africa is on their knees in fear, trembling out of its convoluted minds. Thank you, Burkina Faso and the Sahel states, but we need to be aware, because they will try to do to Ibrahim Traore, as they have done to the Gaddafi, and as they have done to anyone who is anti-establishment and anti-corporations and anti-control. So you need to take care of your leaders. Salute Burkina Faso.
Once again, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm your host Larry, and remember, if you're watching my videos for the first time, kindly like, subscribe, comment and share on my videos. To my returning subscribers, thank you for always taking your time and coming back to watch my videos. Your support means so much to me. And to my new subscribers, thank you, and I want you to feel much welcomed on board. This is the right channel for you. So guys, I hope you've watched the video about the Arab man explaining to us why Africans, we are still having these corrupt leaders, and that you've heard him say that most of us, what we consume, we are consuming what we don't produce. And as you all know, like Africans, we are rich in a lot of minerals, like a lot of them. But you find out that a country is yet to stabilize itself, or rather prefers to export its produce to these foreign countries, and in return, after they have been processed, they sell them back to us at a very high price. Or in other hands, you find out that we just like get a little from what we produce. In most cases, we've heard people complain about our leaders being puppets to these white people, of which I cannot deny that that's the factual truth. Our leaders have become the puppets to these white people. Like, our leaders can't just serve us according to our will, but instead they do that on like depending on the white people's will. Our leaders are serving these white people more than they should serve us. They have become puppets. So another thing we can talk about is the impact of what Ibrahim Traore is doing. For those who don't know Ibrahim Traore, he is the current president of Burkina Faso. And recently, as we all know, he ordered all the foreign and French militaries out of Burkina Faso. And he went ahead and made, or rather brought it to an end, the export of gold from Burkina Faso by the Arabs. They use these Africans to mine these golds. The Africans are dying, but in return they get little, just as little as the breadcrumbs. Now Ibrahim Traore made sure that the gold that is mined in Burkina Faso is and will be used firstly to improve the infrastructure of Burkina Faso as a country, and also improve the lives of the people in Burkina Faso. He made sure that everything that's being produced in Burkina Faso will be used to improve the country's economic status, and as well as the lives of these Burkina Faso people. Another thing, there is this incident whereby the United States offered to give him some vehicles that will be used to the hospitals. For instance, these ambulances and all that, but Ibrahim Traore refused and said no. This man is a very fearless person. So I wish all the leaders all the African leaders would follow the trend that Ibrahim Traore has begun, or rather brought into action, because it's only in that way that we can gain our country's freedom. Like, we should be fully independent. Like, we depend on ourselves, because as we all know, Africa is rich in a lot of minerals. But just because we are having puppet leaders who are cowards, they can't make a bold step with the fear of maybe ruining their relationship with these foreign people. Like, for instance, let's talk about the Chinese, or rather the black people in China, the Africans to be precise, who are in China. We've seen how the Chinese treats the black people who are over in their country in China. We've seen that, like, everywhere, how the Chinese racially discriminates and abuses the black people. But here we are. When they come back to our countries, we welcome everybody with open arms. And there are also incidences that there is this divide and rule. Like, they are causing a lot of conflicts between Africans so that they can take over our resources and everything. And we as Africans, we as black people, we have totally given into these traps. We do exactly what these foreigners command us to do, or rather, we go by their plan. We think that they are our friends, or rather, they are people who are here to help us, but they are not. They are here for their own benefits, not for our own, but for their own benefits. Look, like, for instance, they are the French military bases that were in Burkina Faso. They were not there to protect the lives of the Burkina Faso people. They were there for their own benefits and for their own French nationality's benefits and protection, and as well as exploring the country's valuable minerals. This is why we have a lot of disputes amongst us Africans. We fight our own black people, we fight our own brothers and sisters. We don't support our very own. And like, for instance, this example that has been, like, commonly known, if this foreign person comes and opens his stall or other shop next to other African one, Africans will opt to go to this white person's shop rather, and leaving out our fellow brothers and sisters. And now when something happens, we'll be the first people to go on the streets and protest like Black Lives Matter, while you can't support our very own. You don't support me. How do you, or rather, what do you think you are portraying to this white person, or rather to this foreigner? If you can't respect me, if you can't support me, that person, that foreigner can't do that. Won't and will never give me my respect. So guys, I'm your host Larry. Remember, if you're watching my videos for the first time, kindly like, subscribe, comment and share on my videos. And prayers to the Haiti brothers and sisters. I hope as a country you regain peace and you regain your stability as a country real soon. And until we meet again, peace out.